She was 7 months pregnant, thrown out by her in-laws, and forced to beg on the street until a mysterious millionaire in a pristine white suit dropped to one knee and said, "I have a proposal for you." Amina didn't notice the speeding buses or the shouting hawkers anymore. She had become numb to the noise and to the life that went on around her as if she didn't exist. Her world had shrunk to this hard patch of pavement where she sat every day, holding her stomach and trying not to cry. Her hand rested on her 7-month belly, her fingers trembling not just from hunger, but from the shame that screamed louder than her empty stomach. Just 4 weeks ago, Amina's life was full of hope. But everything changed in a second when the doctor told her that her husband, Tund, had passed away from advanced cancer he had hidden to protect her. Instead of being surrounded by love, she was met with cruelty. Tund's mother and his sister, Bola, branded her a witch, claiming she used witchcraft to kill him. They threw her clothes into a nylon bag and locked the gate, telling her to go back to wherever she came from. She had stopped praying until today, when a white SUV pulled up beside her. The window lowered, and a well-dressed man named Abdulaziz leaned out, looked at her directly, and did the unthinkable. He stepped onto the cracked pavement and dropped to one knee. "I have 2 daughters whose mother left," he said calmly. "I need someone to be a mother to them. Marry me, on paper. I'll give you shelter and peace, and I'll take care of you and your unborn child." Amina stared at him as if he had fallen from the sky, and just like that, her world was about to change again. If you're just tuning into this channel, please subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to share with your friends and family, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments section. The hospital hallway smelled of antiseptic and forgotten prayers, a scent that Amina would forever associate with the moment her soul fractured. She had arrived that morning with a flask of hot pap, the steam rising against the cold glass, a simple offering for Tund after his night of observation. She remembered smiling at the nurses, her hand resting instinctively on her 7-month-old belly, feeling a rare sense of peace despite the sterile surroundings. But the smile died the moment she saw the doctor's face. He didn't have to speak. The hollow pity in his eyes told the story before he could utter the words that Tund had passed away in the early hours. Amina stood frozen, the heavy flask slipping from her fingers, shattering on the tile, a loud final sound that signaled the end of her world. The doctor tried to explain, his voice a distant hum. Tund had advanced pancreatic cancer. He had known for months, suffering in silence, telling her it was nothing more than persistent back pain to protect her and the life growing inside her. When she finally entered the room and saw his lifeless body, a scream that had been building since childhood finally broke free. She wailed like a child, her forehead pressed against his cold chest, begging him to wake up and tell her it was just another secret he was keeping. But the grief of a widow is a luxury in a house ruled by resentment. 1 week later, still draped in the heavy exhaustion of a woman who had forgotten how to sleep, Amina stood at the gates of the family house. She expected comfort. She expected the shared tears of a mother who had lost a son. Instead, she was met with a wall of ice. Tund's mother didn't look at her for 3 days, her silence a sharp blade that cut deeper than any shout. Amina sat in the corners of the house she once called home, ignored by the very people who should have been her shield. No one offered her water. No one asked if the baby had moved. Then, the silence broke into a storm. Bola, Tund's sister, cornered her in the courtyard, her face twisted with a malice that felt ancient. "Mommy never liked you," Bola spat, her voice carrying the weight of years of hidden venom. "We only tolerated you because of Tund, and now you've used your witchcraft to kill him." The accusation hung in the air like a curse. Amina tried to find her voice, her hand trembling against her stomach as she reminded them she was carrying Tund's legacy, his blood. But Bola only hissed, mocking the life within her as a thing that hadn't even earned its right to be called a child. The betrayal reached its peak the following morning. Tund's mother finally spoke, not to offer condolences, but to pronounce a sentence of exile. "You came with empty hands, and now you want to eat what you didn't sow," the older woman said, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. Before Amina could even gather her dignity, her life was reduced to a few items stuffed into a nylon bag and thrown onto the dirt road. The heavy iron gate slammed shut, the lock clicking with a finality that echoed in the empty street. Standing there in the dust, Amina realized she wasn't just a widow. In their eyes, she was a pariah, a husband killer left to the mercy of a world that had none. The sun was a merciless judge over the city, and for Amina, the heat of the pavement had become her only constant companion. She sat with her back against a stained concrete wall, her world reduced to the few square inches of ground she occupied. Her fingers, thin and trembling, rested perpetually on her 7-month-old belly, feeling the slight rhythmic movements of a life that seemed far too innocent for the shame she was enduring. To the passers-by, she was a ghost in a tattered wrapper. To the shouting hawkers and the speeding buses, she was just another obstacle in the road. She had learned to avoid looking into people's eyes, finding that the acid of their pity was often more painful than the hunger gnawing at her insides. She was a woman with no home, no phone, and no one to call her name. She had almost stopped praying, convinced that the heavens had closed their doors just as firmly as Tun's mother had. But then, the air shifted. A white SUV, pristine and imposing, slowed to a crawl before coming to a complete stop right in front of her. The engine hummed with a quiet power that seemed out of place in the chaotic dust of the roadside. Amina pulled her legs closer, expecting to be told to move, but instead, the door opened. Abdulaziz stepped out, his white suit glowing under the harsh midday sun. The crowd of onlookers slowed, their whispers rising like a swarm of bees as they watched the wealthy man approach the pregnant beggar. He didn't just stand over her. In a gesture that caused a collective gasp to ripple through the street, Abdulaziz dropped to one knee in the dirt. He disregarded the dust on his expensive trousers, looking Amina directly in the eyes with a gaze that was neither mocking nor filled with that dreaded pity. "I have a proposal for you, ma'am," he said, his voice a calm anchor in the surrounding noise. Amina narrowed her eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was wary, used to the traps the world set for the vulnerable, but there was a strange, businesslike honesty in his expression. He explained his predicament with startling brevity. He had twin daughters who were a force of nature, a home that lacked a mother's touch, and a need for a partnership that would bring peace to his chaos. "Marry me," he said, the words falling like heavy stones into the silence between them. "Just on paper. I will provide shelter, food, and protection for you and your unborn child. No romance, no pressure. You care for my girls, and I will care for you." Amina looked at the white SUV, then back at the hard, cracked pavement that had been her bed. She thought of the baby shifting in her womb, a child who deserved more than a life defined by a nylon bag of rags. For a full second, she froze, the sheer impossibility of the moment holding her breath captive. Then, she reached out. As she stood, Abdulaziz opened the passenger door, and Amina stepped into a different world. The interior of the car was a sanctuary of cool air and soft leather. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, leaving the stunned witnesses behind, Amina felt the tension begin to drain from her bones. She didn't know if she was walking into a new kind of prison or a miraculous escape, but as she leaned back into the plush seat, she realized that for the first time in weeks, she could finally breathe. The white SUV turned into a sprawling estate, passing through iron gates that felt like the entrance to another dimension. As Amina stepped out of the car, she was met by a mansion so grand and silent it felt intimidating. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers and expensive soap, a sharp contrast to the metallic dust of the roadside she had called home. Abdulaziz led her through the massive front doors, where the floors were tiled in polished stone and the walls were adorned with elegant vases. A middle-aged housekeeper named Chioma appeared, her face a mask of neutral confusion as she took in Amina's tattered state, but Abdulaziz didn't hesitate. "This is Amina," he stated with a tone that brooked no argument. "She's staying with us now. Get the guest room ready." Amina followed Chioma up a wide staircase to a room with pale green curtains and a bed that looked softer than a cloud. When the door closed, Amina sat on the edge of the mattress and wept, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming shock of sudden safety. However, her moment of peace was short-lived. Abdulaziz knocked later that afternoon, informing her that the time had come to meet the true reason for her presence. Be calm, be kind, and don't overreact, Amina whispered to herself as she descended the stairs. Nothing in her life could have prepared her for the living room of the Lonray mansion. It was no longer a sanctuary of wealth, it was a war zone. Toys were scattered like shrapnel, milk was pooled on the expensive rugs, and the air was filled with a high-pitched, manic energy. In the center of the chaos were the twin hurricanes, Jemila and Shetu. Jemila was standing on the back of a velvet couch, screaming for jelly bread, while Sheta sat cross-legged on the floor, laughing hysterically while wearing a cereal bowl like a crown, cornflakes cascading down her hair and sticking to her forehead like sticky golden armor. Chioma muttered a quick good luck and vanished, leaving Amina alone with the two tiny terrors. Jemila stopped her screaming, narrowed her eyes at Amina, and folded her arms across her chest. "Who are you?" she demanded with the authority of a tiny queen. "Are you another nanny? I don't like you." Amina, instead of flinching, took a slow breath and picked up a discarded teddy bear from the mess. She looked at Jemila with a raised brow, a faint smile playing on her lips. "That's okay," Amina said softly. "I didn't like pap when I was your age, but guess what? I still had to eat it." Jemila blinked, stunned by the calm response, while Sheta finally looked up, the cornflakes still clinging to her braids. Sheta crawled over on all fours, staring intently at Amina's protruding belly. "Why is your tummy big?" she asked, her curiosity momentarily overriding her mischief. "Did you eat too much rice?" Amina knelt as best she could, placing a hand on the life within her. "There's a baby in here," she explained. Sheta gasped, her eyes widening as she reached out a sticky hand. "Is it going to pop out today?" From the shadows of the hallway, Abdulaziz watched the scene with a raised brow. He had expected screaming, or perhaps another resigned nanny fleeing for the gates. Instead, he saw his daughters listening, their faces showing a rare flicker of wonder. Amina chuckled at Sheta's question, though her bones ached from the day's journey. "Let's survive this morning first," she said, looking around the room. She knew the partnership was going to be the hardest work she had ever done, but as she looked at the two girls, she felt a flicker of the hope she thought had died on the pavement. The fourth morning began not with a gentle rising of the sun, but with a sharp royal decree that echoed through the marble hallways. Jemila stood in the kitchen, her tiny hands on her hips, her face a mask of brewing thunder as she stared at the breakfast plate. "I want my toast shaped like a rabbit," she screamed, her voice reaching a pitch that usually sent the household staff into a frantic retreat. Amina, however, did not flinch. She stood in the kitchen doorway holding a tray of neatly sliced bread and eggs, her expression as calm as a still lake. "Well, unfortunately, I am not a magician," Amina replied, her voice steady and devoid of the fear the girls were used to seeing. "So today, you're getting rectangles. Fancy rectangles." Jemila's eyes widened at the defiance, her brow furrowing as she folded her arms tightly across her chest. "Then I'm not eating," she declared, waiting for the pleading and the bribes that usually followed her tantrums. But the pleading never came. Instead, Amina simply set the tray on the table with a pleasant smile. "Perfect," Amina said, sliding the plate toward the other twin. "More for Shetu." Shetu, already halfway through her cocoa cereal, gasped with delight. The realization that her hunger was no one's priority but her own hit Jemila like a physical blow. She watched for 5 seconds as Sheta reached for the extra toast before she scrambled off her chair. "No, I changed my mind," she shouted, racing to the table and stuffing a fancy rectangle into her mouth before anyone could stop her. From the shadows of the stairs, Abdulaziz watched with a quiet, growing amusement as the storm was neutralized not with anger, but with an annoying level of calm. They were only a few days into this arrangement, and Amina had not yet cracked under the pressure of his daughter's mischief. Even as the twins moved from breakfast to more creative forms of chaos, hiding their school shoes in the freezer and painting the bathroom mirror with thick streaks of peppermint toothpaste, Amina remained unruffled. She moved through the house with a quiet dignity, treating their tantrums as minor inconveniences rather than catastrophic events. Later that afternoon, Abdulaziz called her into his study to discuss the progress of their partnership. He began to list a series of formal house rules: no entering his room without knocking, no random visitors, and no gossiping with the staff. Amina listened, her brow arched in amusement as the millionaire tried to maintain his businesslike distance. "Is this a contract or a marriage?" she asked, her voice light with a hint of a challenge. When he insisted it was a partnership with a dramatic job description, Amina laughed faintly. "You think this is easy?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "No," she replied, "that's why the other nannies ran away, isn't it?" Abdulaziz tried to correct her, claiming they had resigned, but Amina wasn't buying the corporate spin. "One left her shoes at the gate," she said, her eyes twinkling. "That's not resignation. That's escape." For the first time, Abdulaziz's cold exterior crumbled, and he failed to suppress a laugh. As Amina turned to leave to break up a new fight over a toothbrush, he called out her name to thank her. She didn't look back, only offering a playful warning over her shoulder. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "You haven't seen what they did to the guest bathroom." Abdulaziz had always prided himself on being a man of logic, a man who believed that his emotions were as controlled as his boardroom meetings. He maintained a polite distance, greeting Amina in the mornings as if she were merely a high-performing employee and pretending he wasn't stealing glances at her every 3 minutes. However, the arrival of his friend Zion on a bright Saturday afternoon shattered that illusion of composure. Zion was the polar opposite of Abdulaziz, tall, loud, and the kind of man who moved through life as if he owned every room he entered. He breezed into the mansion unannounced, his sunglasses still on, and immediately let out a whistle that echoed through the marble foyer. "Guy!" Zion shouted, slapping Abdulaziz on the back with a grin that was far too wide. "You've been hiding this mansion and this beautiful woman from us." Amina was just ascending the stairs with Jemila and Shetu, dressed in a simple fitted blue cotton gown that hugged her 7-month belly in a way that made her skin seem to glow. Zion didn't just look, he stared, his eyes lingering on her with an appreciative boldness that made Abdulaziz's jaw tighten instantly. "Wow, so this is the new arrangement?" Zion asked, his voice dripping with charm. "No wonder you stopped replying to my texts." Amina raised a brow, her expression cool and unimpressed. Before she could speak, Abdulaziz cleared his throat aggressively, his voice dropping an octave. "She's not a discussion topic," he snapped, though he tried to mask his irritation as simple professional protection. Amina, sensing the sudden tension, turned to the girls. "Girls, come with me. Let the grown men behave like children." The twins, never ones to miss a chance for a jab, added their own commentary, with Jemila shouting that Uncle Zion looks like a tomato and Shetu adding, "but an old one." Later that day, the tension shifted from the foyer to the kitchen. While Amina was helping Chioma prepare a lunch of rice and stew, Zion wandered in, leaning casually against the doorframe with an easy smile. He began to weave a web of compliments, telling Amina she looked like she belonged on a magazine cover rather than sitting on a roadside. "You've got that rare kind of beauty, Amina," Zion said, his voice lowering as he stepped closer. "You ever think of leaving this deal and trying something more exciting? Like me, for instance?" Amina didn't even look up from slicing her vegetables. "Do you usually flirt with pregnant women cooking stew?" she asked, her voice dry as bone. Just as Zion laughed, Abdulaziz walked into the kitchen carrying a glass of juice. He caught the tail end of the exchange, seeing how close Zion was standing to his partner. For a split second, Abdulaziz's hand shook, not from weakness, but from a surge of possessiveness he wasn't prepared for. Gravity and frustration collided, and the glass tilted, spilling juice across the counter and over his own hand. "Zion, can I see you in my study?" "Now," Abdulaziz barked, his eyes narrowing into slits. Zion blinked, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Ogre, calm down. I'm just having a friendly chat." Amina continued chopping her vegetables as if the two men weren't there, but a small, knowing smile played on her lips. She had seen the way Abdulaziz watched her, and as she heard him pacing in his study moments later, she realized the no romance rule was becoming the hardest regulation in the house to follow. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday outing, a quiet family picnic designed to offer a reprieve from the madness of the mansion. Abdulaziz had planned it all in his head, even donning a pair of dark sunglasses to project an air of relaxed detachment. However, the moment Amina stepped out of her room, the atmosphere in the foyer shifted. She wore a soft floral blouse and jeans that complemented her glowing skin and the proud curve of her baby bump, looking less like a woman rescued from the streets and more like a queen from a maternity fashion shoot. Even the girls were stunned, with Jemila gasping that she looked like an expensive queen, while Shetu argued she was a princess. Abdulaziz stood by the stairs, momentarily frozen like a glitching robot, blinking rapidly as he tried to process how his business partner could look so radiant. The car ride to the amusement park was filled with Jemila's endless singing, but once they arrived, the serenity Abdulaziz hoped for evaporated instantly. The park was crowded, and Amina was a magnet for attention. As she chased after the twins with a juice bottle, begging Shetu not to climb the fence, Abdulaziz began to notice the lingering stares of other men. A security guard muttered a prayer of longing as she walked by, and another man stepped forward to offer help with her purse, even though she was managing perfectly fine. Abdulaziz felt a heat rising in his chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. He was already sweating, his jaw tight with a burgeoning possessiveness. The final straw came when a bold man in sunglasses approached Amina while she was helping Sheta tie a shoe. The stranger leaned in with a practiced smile, telling her she had dropped his heart. Before Amina could even formulate a dry retort, Abdulaziz materialized behind her like a dark shadow. "She's married, pregnant, and busy," he snapped, his voice a low growl that sent the man backing away in a hurry. Amina blinked in surprise, noting that his intervention was entirely unnecessary, but Abdulaziz only mumbled that he was protecting his investment. Amina suppressed a smile, whispering that he had been breathing like a jealous dragon since they left the house. Throughout the rest of the day, Abdulaziz remained on high alert, his eyes tracking every man who so much as looked in Amina's direction. When a young boy merely asked her for directions, Abdulaziz followed the child with a piercing gaze until he disappeared. At one point, as Amina bent down to clean a spilled drink off Sheta's dress, Abdulaziz abruptly turned to face a nearby tree. When Amina asked what he was doing, he claimed to be enjoying nature and the texture of the bark, his face flushed with an irritation he couldn't hide. By the time they returned to the house, the twins had passed out from exhaustion, but the tension between the adults remained. Later that night, Amina found a handwritten note slipped under her door. It was from Abdulaziz, admitting that perhaps he had been a little jealous, but concluding with a rare moment of vulnerability. He wanted to be the reason she looked that happy. Amina chuckled to herself as she slid the note into her diary, realizing that the man who had picked her up from the roadside was falling for her just as hard as she was falling for him. Abdulaziz tried to act normal in the days following the park outing, but the air in the mansion had grown heavy with things left unsaid. He greeted Amina in the mornings with a stiff politeness, asking if the twins had eaten their vegetables while pretending he wasn't stealing glances at her every 3 minutes. It was a failing strategy. Amina had gone from being the woman he rescued off the roadside to the person whose laughter echoed in his head long after the house went silent. That Thursday morning, she came down the stairs in a soft blue cotton maternity gown that hugged her belly in the most elegant way, and the sight was enough to make Abdulaziz knock over his glass of juice at the breakfast table. The twins screamed with delight, mocking their father for spilling like a baby, while Amina laughed and asked if he was truly okay. He muttered something about gravity, wiping the table with an aggressive energy that fooled no one. By early afternoon, after the girls had left for school and the house had settled into a rare quiet, Abdulaziz finally cracked. He found Amina in the living room folding tiny socks, her movements calm and rhythmic. He walked in with his hands buried deep in his pockets, pacing the floor as he admitted that their arrangement had worked far better than he had ever expected. He spoke of how she had handled the chaos with grace, making the girls love her and making the house feel alive again. Amina paused her folding, looking up with an amused glint in her eyes, asking if he was trying to fire her or propose to her. Abdulaziz laughed awkwardly, finally admitting that he didn't think their life together should be temporary anymore. He suggested they stop pretending they were only doing this for the sake of the children. Amina didn't offer a polite giggle. Instead, she burst into a full-on wheezing laughter that left her wiping her eyes. She told him it was hilarious that he wanted to stop pretending, as if they hadn't both been sneaking glances at each other for weeks. She admitted she saw the way he looked at her when she was talking to the girls, or even when she was simply scooping rice. Abdulaziz stepped closer, his voice softening as he confessed that there was something very attractive about the way she scooped rice, to which she raised a brow and teased him about food service being his true love language. The cold businessman who had made the roadside proposal was gone, replaced by a man who was softer, warmer, and entirely real. Amina looked at him and softly admitted that she had stopped pretending a long time ago as well. Before they could bridge the remaining distance, the front door swung open and the voices of Jemila and Shetu rang through the entrance. The girls were home early because the school power had failed, and they found the adults jumping apart like guilty teenagers. Amina laughed under her breath, realizing that while reality had returned, it was a reality she no longer wanted to escape. Later that night, Abdulaziz slipped another note under her door, playfully asking what flavor of wedding cake she preferred. Amina picked up the paper, pressed it to her chest, and whispered vanilla to the empty room, knowing that life was finally handing her a miracle she could keep. The wedding day arrived with a gentle warmth that Amina never thought she would experience again, certainly not in a house where she had once walked in as a stranger. She stood before the full-length mirror in the guest room, wearing a cream-colored gown with delicate lace sleeves and a faint sparkle at the waist that caught the morning light. It was a far cry from the tattered wrapper she had worn on the pavement. Today she looked radiant, her pregnancy adding a soft glow to her features. Jemila and Shetu burst into the room, already transformed into princess brides in their matching gowns and tiny tiaras. Jemila gasped, declaring that Amina looked like Cinderella, while Shetu corrected her, noting that Cinderella didn't have a baby in her tummy. Amina laughed, pulling them into a hug, realizing these hurricanes had become the anchors of her new life. Downstairs, the mansion had been transformed into a sanctuary of white and gold ribbons and soft pink flowers. Abdulaziz stood at the foot of the stairs in a sharp suit, fidgeting with his cufflinks with the nervous energy of a man who still couldn't believe his luck. His friend Zion stood beside him as the best man, whispering jokes about how the strict business partnership had ended in a man about to cry. When the music began and Amina started her descent, hand in hand with the girls, time seemed to stand still. Abdulaziz looked stunned, his breath catching as he watched the woman who had brought peace to his chaos walk toward him. The vows were short but filled with a depth that silenced everyone in the room. Abdulaziz took her hand, promising that he would spend the rest of his life ensuring she never felt unloved or abandoned again. Amina, her eyes misting with tears, whispered that he had given her a home when she had nothing, no pride, no place to sleep, and no hope. She wasn't marrying him because she needed rescue anymore. She was marrying him because of the man he had become. Before the minister could even finish the ceremony, the twins began clapping, and the room erupted in laughter as Abdulaziz leaned in to kiss her forehead. But the celebration of their union was only the beginning of the day's miracles. Just as the guests were settling into the reception, Amina felt a sharp, familiar pressure that signaled the end of one journey and the start of another. The vanilla and glitter wedding quickly shifted into a high-stakes race to the hospital, with Jemila insisted on packing her own bag of biscuits and Shetu singing a baby welcome song at the top of her lungs. The labor was long and dramatic, but when Amina finally held her son in her arms, the healing was complete. They named him Sani, a beautiful boy with chubby cheeks and tiny fingers that gripped Amina's heart the moment they touched her skin. The twins immediately claimed him, arguing over who he looked like and promising to teach him how to be a superhero. Abdulaziz watched his expanded family from the bedside, realizing that the paper marriage had grown into a legacy of blood and love. As Sani let out his first robust cry, Amina looked at her husband and smiled through her exhaustion, knowing that the beggar who had once sat in the dust was finally truly home. The Lonray household officially entered a state of beautiful madness following Sani's first birthday. The mansion, once a silent monument to wealth, was now louder than a secondary school cafeteria during break time, filled with a constant soundtrack of Malik, now known as Sani, chasing anything that jingled, and the twins, Gemma and Shetu, acting like backup mothers with full-blown superhero complexes. Gemma had taken to waking up at 5 in the morning, not for any academic pursuit, but to conduct what she called royal inspections of her baby brother, checking his toes and speaking to him in a posh accent she had picked up from cartoons. Shetu, the strategic one, had taped a colored pencil schedule to the nursery wall that mandated specific times for telling the baby secrets and making him giggle. Abdulaziz was no longer the composed, sharp-suited CEO the world knew in boardrooms. He had traded his power ties for an infant carrier strapped to his chest, becoming the house's official bottle rinser and lullaby DJ. Amina would often walk into the nursery to find him humming off-key with Sani on his lap, his eyes red from lack of sleep, yet shining with a joy he had never found in shareholder meetings. They rarely had quiet moments, but when they did, they treasured them, sitting on the bedroom floor late at night after all the children were finally asleep, sharing snacks like teenagers and marveling at how their lives had shifted. Abdulaziz would look at the marker stains on the walls and the bite marks on his wedding shoes and simply laugh, noting that the chaos was what made the house theirs. However, the universe had one more surprise in store for the family. It happened on an afternoon when Amina was folding tiny laundry and the world suddenly began to spin. Abdulaziz caught her before her knees hit the floor, his internal composure giving way to a frantic panic he tried to hide. They rushed to the hospital, expecting exhaustion or perhaps a minor ailment, but the doctor walked in with a smile that was far too suspicious. "Congratulations," the doctor said, looking at the scan. "You're pregnant. And it gets better. You're having twins." Abdulaziz sat down, then stood up, then sat down again, staring at the screen as if it were a complex financial report he couldn't quite decipher. "Twins?" "Again," he muttered, resting his head against the wall while Amina stared at the two strong heartbeats in shock. Outside the room, Gemma and Shetu had been eavesdropping from behind the waiting room curtains. Upon hearing the news, Gemma screamed that she needed more glitter for the 4 sisters they were about to become, while Abdulaziz joked through his days that they were going to need a full-size bus just to leave the driveway. Amina looked at her husband, tired and shocked, but deeply happy. Life had handed her pain on the roadside, followed by mercy in a white SUV, and now it was handing her a future overflowing with more love than she had ever dared to imagine. As they left the hospital, hand in hand with the twins and Sani, she realized that their story didn't need a quiet ending. It was a crazy, crowded, and beautiful journey that had all started with a single proposal on a dusty road.